You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got some breaking news here. Jack Smith has decided to resign officially from the Justice Department. So right off the bat, why resign? Why not at least make Donald Trump fire you? Why obey in advance?
What a great question. And there's no right or wrong answer. I think there are a couple of schools of thought. First of all, remember, Jack Smith, although he worked for the Department of Justice previously, when he was called to serve again as special counsel to investigate Donald Trump's election crimes and classified documents crimes, he was working as a prosecutor at The Hague. He was going after war criminals. So he came back to serve his country again as special prosecutor, special counsel. So, it's not a surprise, I guess, that he is not going to try to remain at the Department of Justice, realizing that his work as special counsel is at an end. I mean, literally, they would have to find another position for him at the Department of Justice if he decided to stick around just to have Donald Trump vindictively fire him from the Department of Justice. I can't help but think about my friend Andrew McCabe, who was the acting director of the FBI, who Donald Trump's administration fired one day shy of his retirement vesting. The good news is Andy McCabe successfully sued and overturned that, and he did get his retirement. So it doesn't surprise me that Jack Smith doesn't want to stick around just to be fired. For all we know, he may have already lined up his next position. It may very well be back in The Hague, continuing to get after war criminals. So not really shocking news, and I think the writing was on the wall. Why wait to be fired? I don't really see that as obeying in advance necessarily. Why wait to be fired when you know the very position you were brought to the Department of Justice to fill no longer exists? Special counsel investigating the crimes of Donald Trump.
I understand that practically speaking, there would be no position for him, that Donald Trump would fire him anyway, and so why not just get out ahead of it? It's not going to change anything. I understand all of that, and maybe I'm just being Pollyanna about all of this, but I feel like anybody doing anything in anticipation of what they know Trump is going to do still is just giving this sense that people are kind of laying down for him, in the sense that, like, why not just force him to do this thing? Why not force him to be the one to go ahead and fire Jack Smith, as opposed to Jack Smith saying, well, he's going to do it anyway, and so I'm just going to get out in front of it. And by the way, it's not just Jack Smith. I mean, we have seen all of these news outlets. We've seen ABC turn a frivolous lawsuit into a $15 million donation, so to speak, to Donald Trump. We've seen Jeff Bezos do it. We've seen the owner of the LA Times do it. We've seen Mark Zuckerberg do it. We've seen Amazon buy Melania's $40 million documentary to air. We see constant examples of these people kind of already recognizing the power that Trump is going to have, and so instead of offering even an ounce of pushback, it's the polar opposite. It is heaping goodwill onto him in advance of him even taking office, knowing full well that that I guess they would rather be in his good graces than put up anything even resembling a fight. And again, maybe this is me being Pollyanna about this and thinking that the fight is going to matter for anything, but does that factor into your thinking at all? Like the virtue of at least forcing Trump to do the bad thing, as opposed to just giving him an easy out by doing it in advance of him even taking office?
Yeah, Brian, it's a valid point. Look, I'm a big believer in Professor Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny, where, one of the main rules when you encounter a tyrant, an aspiring dictator, is don't obey in advance. I don't see, and I can see the criticism of a Jack Smith. Well, why don't you just stick it out and be fired? I see it as a little bit different. Jack Smith, as best I can tell, given the manner in which he was brought back to the Department of Justice, doesn't have a job at the Department of Justice. Once he was done working as special counsel, his office is dissolved. He's already delivered his report to Attorney General Garland. He literally, I believe, does not have a position at the Department of Justice. He would probably have to go about applying to be hired by the Department of Justice into some position. I will say for our viewers, he held the position previously as the head of the public integrity section. So, he is no stranger to the upper echelon of the DOJ operation. But I feel like his time as special counsel is at an end. So he's not so much quitting something, but what he was doing is at an end, and he would probably have to affirmatively apply to the Department of Justice to find some other position there.
Right. No, that makes sense. And then I guess in the aftermath of this chapter, of this era, do you look back and, I mean, obviously Jack Smith did what he could in the little bit of time that he could do it, but you look back at somebody like Merrick Garland, how do you think history is going to view Merrick Garland in the aftermath of this administration, knowing that we didn't even see Jack Smith appointed until years after the events of January 6th actually concluded, thereby effectively making it impossible for Jack Smith to even get Donald Trump in a courtroom before he would ultimately be elected president of the United States again?
You know, I think, decades ago, history will write that Merrick Garland was a fine prosecutor. In fact, at my former office, the D.C. United States Attorney's Office prosecuted some very charged cases, charged not only on the facts and the law, but on the atmospherics, like he headed up the prosecution of then Mayor Marion Barry. And I think he will also go down in the history books as a fine judge of 24 years. But I think as Attorney General, he was the wrong man for the moment, to the extent he used to have prosecutorial chops and instincts and an appropriate aggressiveness when it comes to going after very difficult, politically and emotionally fraught cases. He seemed to have lost all those instincts in his 24 years as a judge, and when he tried to step back into the shoes of a prosecutor, indeed the top prosecutor, the Attorney General for the United States, he did not rise to meet the moment. Instead, he let so much time go by before there was any investigation initiated into the hierarchy of the insurrection, the command structure, the suits of the insurrection, as opposed to the boots of the insurrection, the people that Donald Trump said, go down to the Capitol, fight like hell, or you won't have a country anymore. Now stop the certification, stop the steal. No secret that Donald Trump incited the Capitol attack. Merrick Garland, the one thing I will say in his defense, and it's really only procedurally in his defense, is he felt like he didn't have to appoint special counsel until Donald Trump announced that he would again run for president, because that is the moment at which the conflict ripened. Why was there a conflict once Donald Trump announced his candidacy? Because now he is the opponent of Merrick Garland's boss, Joe Biden. That's the moment when special counsel had to be appointed. Could have been, in his discretion, appointed earlier than that, but sort of pushing all of that to the side, that is a procedural observation. The Department of Justice should have been going balls to the wall, investigating Donald Trump beginning on January 7th for his incitement of an insurrection, not to mention, Brian, all of the crimes that he committed while in office before January 6, 2021, when he, for example, committed as many as 10 obstruction of justice crimes, as was meticulously detailed in Volume 2 of Special Counsel Bob Mueller's Trump-Russia report. There was also extortion and bribery of President Zelensky. Hey, I know you want these congressionally appropriated funds, President Zelensky, so you can defend your country against unlawful Russian aggression. But you know what? I need a favor, though. I need you to falsely announce that you're investigating my political opponent, Joe Biden. Brian, that is extortion and bribery that a novice prosecutor could prove in their sleep. And so many other offenses that went unaddressed by Merrick Garland and his Department of Justice, even long before the moment came when special counsel had to be appointed.
I would have more sympathy for his decision to ultimately appoint Jack Smith after Donald Trump announced, if Merrick Garland himself had been doing something about it in the lead up to Donald Trump announcing. But absent that, what were you waiting for? Why not? If you weren't going to do it even before Trump announced, then what new distance are you creating by virtue of appointing Jack Smith if there was already nothing being done in the lead up to Trump announcing? Like, if you weren't gonna investigate him after he announced or before he announced, then just appoint Jack Smith immediately. If you don't have, look, To put this indelicately, if you don't have the balls to do your job and start investigating Donald Trump as soon as you take office, then just appoint someone who will. But to do nothing, or to do as little as possible, which virtually amounted to nothing at this point, only to then wait till Donald Trump announced, and then there become this conflict to the point where you do have to appoint Jack Smith, seems completely upside down. And we know now, in retrospect, Monday morning quarterbacking, that ultimately it was the wrong decision because Jack Smith then wouldn't have had enough time to actually see this case through until the end, and he didn't. And now we're at the point where even after stealing classified documents, violating the Espionage Act, and seeking to overturn a free and fair election to try and install himself the winner, none of that was able to actually have its day in court by virtue of the amount of time that was squandered, worrying more about the optics of politicization. And the irony of all of that, Glenn, is that nobody on the right views this DOJ as not being weaponized. And so all of that waiting that you thought was going to buy you some goodwill, at the end of the day amounted to nothing, because all of these people still spent the entirety of Joe Biden's presidency claiming that the Department of Justice was weaponized against Donald Trump. And so these people bent over backwards to try and buy themselves some goodwill. Republicans, regardless, continued to attack these people as if they had been investigating Trump all along. And so let that be a lesson to Democrats moving forward, that trying to confer goodwill onto Republicans in hopes that it will be reciprocated will never redound to our benefit. We will never see that goodwill reciprocated. We will never see Republicans thank any of the Democrats for deferring to the optics of politicization. They will always attack as if Democrats are doing the worst possible iteration of what they're claiming we're doing. And so I hope that the next person who comes in, if God willing, a Democrat is able to take office again and appoint an attorney general, that they don't take the Merrick Garland model of hoping that Republicans appreciate some goodwill that we're offering them, because at this point, really the lesson that we should learn is that it really buys us nothing at the end of the day.
Yeah, Brian, I don't think there is any disputing the fact that we are about to suffer a second Donald Trump administration due to the failure of the institutions of government, primarily the FBI and the Department of Justice, their inaction, their timidity, their fear of criticism as doing something that was born of politics and not born of enforcing the rule of law. For gosh sakes, when somebody who loses a presidential election incites an attack on the U.S. Capitol to try to unlawfully retain the power of the presidency, and as you say, just weeks later, steals classified information for we still don't know what reason, obstructs justice and defies grand jury subpoenas and violates our nation's espionage laws because of the sensitivity of the classified information he stole and unlawfully retained. The reason we will now suffer a second Donald Trump term was because the lack of appropriate, aggressive law enforcement conduct by the FBI, by the DOJ, headed up by Merrick Garland.
Well, look, lawlessness begets lawlessness, and nothing will embolden more lawlessness than a Department of Justice that refuses to do its job out of fear for looking political. And I guarantee you that if you ask anybody on the left whether Merrick Garland was able to successfully deflect any optics of politicization, I think that we're all pretty united in saying that that wasn't the case, that in fact there is nothing more political than allowing Donald Trump, by virtue of his political position and the office that he was running for, to get away with all these crimes. Nothing more political than that. So again, hopefully that's a lesson for the next Democratic administration and for Democrats more broadly, who think that, again, they're going to buy themselves some goodwill for Republicans by virtue of sticking their necks out, only to see it, come back and bite them in the ass. So with that said, I know that, you and I have spoken at length about the posture that Democrats should be taking as it relates to the legal world moving forward. I know that you and I are quite coordinated in terms of our mentality about this, in terms of the fact that Democrats should fight insofar as we're able to engender any any change here, any at least impact the media narrative. I know that we'll continue to do that and push on Democrats to fight as much as they can moving forward, especially as we head into this second Trump term. So with that said, for those who are watching right now, if you'd like to support our work and follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.